Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. Sorella, Olyrian Lannister was the most infuriating man she had ever known. He had not gone west to the Night Fort with his father and the king. He'd stayed in Castle Black. Why? He wouldn't tell her. Oh, he had said something that morning about being needed at Castle Black. But when she had asked him what he was supposed to do there, he just gave her that infuriating look of stillness that he had sometimes and told her that he just needed to be there. Infuriating wasn't the word. What wasn't he telling her? She watched him as he practiced his swordplay in the square of Castle Black against a man of the Night's Watch. She could tell that they were both good, most skilled, and she could also see that to one side that Lannister lackey Merbrand was watching the two from one of the balconies, leaning against a post, with an odd look on his face. Horns wailed in the near distance, with horns wailing back from the gatehouse of Castle Black, and she turned to look as the gates opened. A group of horsemen rode in, and as she looked at them, her heart almost stopped in her chest for an instant. No, it could not be him, but then she focused on the face of the smiling dark-haired man with a short beard who rode like man born to ride a horse, and who had the tan of a man of Dorne. Father! The word ripped its way out of her throat, and she regretted it for an instant. She was a daughter of the Red Viper of Dorne, and she should not have reacted like that. But the sight of him was also a reminder of home after so long away from it. And after a moment, she regretted her outburst, not at all. Her father looked at her and grinned as he dismounted and then strode towards her, his arms outstretched. Sarala? And then she flung herself into those arms, and for a long moment, everything was as well as it could ever be, as father hugged her. After that moment, he untightened that hug and looked at her critically, his eyes searching her face. You're thinner than you were. And cold. These northern climes do not agree with you, my daughter. She laughed at that. Welcome to the wall, father. Welcome to the war. He sobered at that. Yes, the war at the wall, or what will soon be a war here. Father looked about Castle Black for a moment. I don't see the banner of the king. Where is he? The Night Fort, father. Come, I need to tell you what has happened. She guided him to the room that she had been sleeping in, closed the door, and then stepped into his hug again, which was a fierce one. My dear daughter, after reading your tale of fighting whites and others, I was so proud of you, and so afraid for you. Your report was read to the small council, or what there was of it, with the king in the hand away. So, tell me everything. So she did. She poured a cup of wine for them both. Sat on the bed, whilst father sat on a chair, and then just talked. She told him everything that she had seen and heard, smelt and thought, feared and hoped for. She talked until she was hoarse, and she was looking at the far wall, almost glassy-eyed with astonishment over what she had seen. When she looked back at father, she could see, to her surprise, that he had unshed tears in his eyes. Father, I am sorry, my daughter. You should not be a Sand, you should be a Martell. I am so proud of you. So very proud. You have seen things and done things that would make any bard in Sunspear sing such songs about your deeds. She blinked at that. Yes, father could be emotional, but the pride in his voice made her blush for a moment. I wish that I could have done more, she said honestly after a moment of composing herself. I should have done more. And there is so much more to come. Father, Dorne cannot sit this fight out. We win or lose this war here, on the wall. Father looked at her for a long moment and then, finally, nodded. I agree, which is one of the reasons why I am here, having transported the wildfire that mad fuck Aerys Targaryen had made to burn King's Landing to the ground in his even madder plan to become a dragon. He looked at the pained expression on her face and chuckled. I know, it was insanely dangerous, but it had to be done. And I made the acquaintance of the Onion Knight. It's a shame he's tied so closely to Stannis Baratheon. The man's an absolute gem. And with that, father stood, clapped his hands together, and rubbed them energetically. So, the king is at the Night Fort, is he? He is. Tomorrow at noon he hopes to talk to Robb Stark via that chair that only Starks can use. A magic chair! Father's eyes were alight with fascination. And we will see that. We ride for the Night Fort at dawn. Or even before dawn, we must be there to see this phenomenon. She smiled at him. Of course, father, and I need to talk to you about... A fist knocked politely. There could be no other word for it, at the door. Father wheeled at it and then glanced at her before saying, Come. The door opened to reveal Oberyn Lannister, who seemed utterly unsurprised at the sight of father. Indeed, he then bowed formally and said, "Prince Oberyn Martell, Oberyn Lannister, at your service." Father drew himself up to his full height, shot a look at her that made her swallow nervously, and then nodded. "Ah, the son of Tyrion Lannister, I have been told. How may I help you?" The faintest of smiles crossed Oberyn's face before he looked behind him. "Someone needs to talk to you," and then she saw that Ned Dane, Lord Dane, was standing there, dawn in both hands, and with a look on his face that reminded him of someone that she could not put her finger on. "Prince Oberyn," Lord Dane said as he stepped forwards. "When my father died, I came north from King's Landing as soon as I could to the Wall, because of the call. I was not able to pledge my allegiance as the head of House Dane to your brother at Sunspear. I would like to do so now with you acting as a proxy." He bowed formally to father, who drew himself up and then formally, almost regally, nodded in recognition. "On behalf of House Martell, I accept your fealty, Lord Dane. Your father was a good man. My brother and I were sad to hear of his passing." For a heartbeat, an odd look passed over the face of Lord Dane, and once again it reminded her of someone else, a nagging, elusive sensation that made her suppress a frown. Father nodded again. "Tomorrow at dawn we ride for the Night Fort to see this magic chair that only the Starks can use. Will you two ride with us?" The two did not look startled in any way, but Lord Dane looked at Alarion briefly as if he had heard something confirmed. "We will ride with you," Alarion said, and then they both nodded formally and walked away. "Interesting," Father said quietly as he closed the door behind them. "Interesting." He seemed to pause for thought for a long moment, and then he smiled. "An unusual Lancety, do not worry, I will stay my hand, and an unusual Dane. Most unusual, his father. I must think on this, but I have a theory already." And then Father smiled at her. "So, food, and wine, and a rest before tomorrow, because we will ride early." Tyrion! When he awoke that morning, he had his usual moment of contentment at the fact that his wife was next to him, his wife who he loved, and who loved him back. There were times when he had nightmares about waking up and finding that she wasn't there anymore, that their time together had been nothing but an illusion, that he was back in his bed, alone, in Casterly Rock, not Father's heir, not the wielder of Rocktooth and the Warnings, just a bitter, drunken dwarf with a liking for whores. Those nightmares were terrible ones, especially as he often wondered just how like Father he could be. He was Father's heir, but how far did that go? Father had been marked by Grandfather's folly. He had to be harder and harsher and less of a fool than Grandfather had been. But how much of that driven by apparent need and how much by the internal character of the man? Tyrion knew that there was a darkness within him. Daisy brought out the light, and it was as simple as that, which was why he was so afraid to lose her. Stop that. He looked at his wife. "What? You're brooding again." He wanted to say "I'm not," but the words would not leave his mouth. Instead, he sighed. "I can't help it." "Yes, you can." She rolled over, the sheet falling in a way that exposed those lovely breasts of hers. "You are not your father. I know that you worry about it, and I know that you are right to worry about it. I know that you sense a shadow within you." Her gaze hardened. "But you also know that shadows are banished by the light of laughter and love and wanting to be a better person. And I know that you are a far better person than your father is. So, stop brooding and kiss me." He did so, and when they eventually left their quarters and went to the Great Hall to break their fast, he was suppressing a smirk, and she was looking, in his humble opinion, like a cat that got the cream, although he could think of a number of different ways to allude to making love in the way that they had. As they were sitting down and tucking in, he was famished. Lewin strode in, looked about, then make a beeline for where they were sitting. "Lord Tyrion, Lady Daisy, you must see this." The maester handed over a thick sheaf of papers, a combination of some kind of report, written in small, tight handwriting, and carefully drawn pictures in various colored inks. "It's from Maester Cresson at Dragonstone." Tyrion looked like he had chewed on some bacon, and then he and Daisy both blinked, swallowed, and then looked through the papers that were now spread in front of them. This was at Dragonstone. These cave paintings. Wait, and those handprints, children of the forest. That's the work of the first men and the children, Daisy said excitedly as she looked at the pictures. Those are carved runes. Place of seeing past. No, remembering. And those are painted images of wights and others. Tyrion breathed as he looked at some of the other pictures. Cresson found these by a great vein of dragon glass. He did indeed, Lewin nodded as he looked over the papers. They came by horsemen from White Harbor. Cresson said that he sent detailed accounts to Winterfell, King's Landing, and the Citadel. Then may the gods bless Master Cresson, Tyrion said as he looked at the pictures of the paintings and the carvings. They knew, didn't they? They knew the danger they faced. They knew that the others were a terrible threat to them. He stared at the sketch of a three-fingered hand and a thumb, and they knew the children of the forest. They allied themselves to them, even down there in Dragonstone. I wonder, what else is on that island? That hidden godswood when Shireen was cured. What else was lost over the years? Daisy asked sadly. He looked at her and she smiled a smile of infinite sadness at him. My father would have adored this, every bit of it, fascinated by it. He smiled back at her. I wish I could have met him. And then he pored over the drawings and read the report from Crisson. Should we mention this to Quicksilver? We should, Daisy muttered as she also looked at the papers in deep concentration. There's history here that must be woven into our plans. We must ally ourselves more firmly with the children. He looked at her. You think that happened in the past? I do. She seemed to struggle with the thought for a long moment. It would explain much. Ned's children are all wargs. Potentially, at least. And there is something about this link between Bran and Quicksilver that makes me think that the alliance will happen again. They have a destiny. She said the last 4 words with an inflection that made him pause for thought. He nodded after a long moment. It would indeed make sense. And with so much at stake, he paused for a long moment and then gestured with one hand as if grasping something. We cannot waste any chance on this. There is so much at stake. Everything rests on what happens at the wall. Gods. We cannot fail on this. If we fail, we all die. Daisy looked at him for a long moment and then nodded. And then she looked away, seeming to be nervous. I'm late. He peered down at the pictures again. Late for what? Late as in my moon's blood is late. And that made him freeze in place on his chair, as if he had suddenly become a part of the wall. Late? 10 days late. She took a deep breath. Tyrion, I need to talk to Maester Luwin about this, but I think that I am pregnant. He looked at her, feeling dazed. Something seemed to have happened to his stomach, and he felt impossibly light about his head. Really? Yes, she looked at him, seeming concerned. Are you all right? Really? Pregnant? Yes, possibly. I need to talk to Luwin. Husband, are you all right? He considered this for a moment. I am perfectly fine. And then everything went black, as he fainted. Robert, there was, of course, a log waiting for him to carry around the main courtyard of the Night Fort in the morning, and he did his usual exercises first thing after waking up in a room that showed every sign of a lot of repairs. The place was old. He could tell that by the stonework, and he could even see runes carved into some of the lower courses of the walls, like Winterfell. It made him wonder about who had built what at the wall again. He needed to ask Umber a few things, as there was a man who hid his wits behind a loud and boisterous visage. A tankard of ale waved in the air before him at almost all times. And then those keen eyes, almost as keen as Manderley. Or Ned. He almost paused as he huffed his way in his latest circuit about the yard. He knew he'd been a shit king, but he was a lot less shit than he used to be. If only Lyanna had lived, and then he thrust the thought away. No, he could not go down that path again. He would not wallow in grief and pain for what was past. He'd tried that in the past, and what had it gotten him? A fat belly, an aching head, and a life of existing, not living, just existing, like a ghost in his own life. And 3 bastards had been passed offices right under his own nose because that nose had been buried in too many cups of wine or the tits of too many whores and other women. Storm King. He needed to be that title, but he still didn't know how to. Well, he needed to, and right fast. Ned, from all accounts, was becoming something that he probably didn't understand either, but the realm needed them both. If Ned was turning a key within him to become that something else, God's what had happened in Old Town, then how could he do the same himself? Would the runes help? Stormbreaker? More visions of the past? He could feel his shoulders burn, his thighs too, but he kept on at it, matching the previous day's total, and then adding 2 more before throwing the log down, and then taking a piece of cloth from Bearston Selmy, with a nod of thanks. Your Grace is pushing yourself a little this morning, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard said. I should not ask why. Ser Barristan, he replied, as he wiped his face and neck, which streamed with sweat despite the chill air. If I ever slack off again, you have my permission to tell me that I am doing so. Use whatever language you like. Somley's mouth twitched. That might not be proper, but I will find a way if it is necessary. He paused. Your Grace, might we talk somewhere we cannot be overheard? I have a plan about the new Kingsguard that you commanded me to build. He eyed the silver-haired man, saw the resolution in his face, and then nodded as he pulled a clean shirt on, and then reached for a coat and robe. Up on the wall? The platform to the top is safe again. Mormont says. Up on the wall it was. The members of the Night's Watch left them alone in one of the vantage points of the north, where a brazier burned. Salmi took a deep breath. Your Grace, Blount must be dismissed. Trant must be reviewed. He is a strange man. And Oakhart must be questioned. And there must be new appointments, which is where I have a plan. 7 is too small a number, and besides, the pressure on them is too great, whilst we have had no Crispin culls in many a year. Salmi's voice grew cold and almost as icy as the wall itself. The actions of Hightower, Wend, and Dane in the matter of the Lady Lyanna Stark are almost as bad. I suggest increasing the number of the Kingsguard from 7 to 49. That would expand our number, make it easier to defend your Grace, and still be an auspicious number for members of the faith. 7 times 7. I see the symbolism. He nodded with thought. What else? They must be chosen from those who are truly worthy. Brave men, not those tied to great houses who have done no great things. It is not enough to be a great jouster. They should be real knights. Those who keep to their vows, no matter where they are from Dorne to the north. The north does not have knights the way that the Reach does, but I care not. The castles in Winterfell, both of them are true to their word and every bit as good as anyone who swears an oath to the 7. His face worked for a long moment, and Robert waited as the man wrestled with the words. And we need a new oath for the Kingsguard, one that does not make them mindless servants, who obey even the most monstrous orders. The Lady Lyanna, the wildfire under King's Landing, that can never happen again. This is not, I must think on this more, but we must have a balance between duty and what is right, your Grace. No culls, no Hightowers, just that. His fist hit the nearest wall. That reminder, the king must be reminded of what is right. Even if the king dismisses that Kingsguard, he must be reminded of what is right. Robert looked at him for a long moment, as he considered what he had said, and then after a long moment he nodded. If I ever go as mad as Acreus or Rhaegar, even if the latter thought he was doing what was right, only to realize that he was wrong, you stop me, Ser Barristan. Salmi, you're right. Some things are just wrong, unacceptable. Crimes against the realm. Salmi drew himself up and then formally nodded. Robert nodded back, and then quirked an eyebrow. You wanted to tell me your plan in a place where the lords and lickspittles couldn't hear you and get appalled by your plan? The Lord Commander of the Kingsguard pulled a slight face, but then nodded again. I fear the initial reaction to my proposals, your Grace. There will be those who will nod and say that I have a good point, but then ask if this is the right time, or if we should be cautious, or if the leading lords of the realm should be informed first, so that they could press their suit for the more suitable candidates first. He dipped his head in response. I understand. That's why we're up here, isn't it? Salmi smiled slightly. I would not want any hints to leak out. This will be controversial, your Grace. He snorted. Good. You're right. It's a good idea. He paused. You'll need larger quarters in the Red Keep, whenever we see it again, that is. And the White Book will either expand to many volumes or will have to be much abridged. But this is the right thing to do, your Grace. I know it. Then go ahead and do it, Ser Barristan. You have my full permission. Salmi drew himself up again and then bowed formally. Honor to serve your Grace. A horn wailed in the distance, and they both turned to look south at the entrance to the Night Fort. Far below, he could see a mounted group approaching the gates. There were banners at the front of them, one quite distinctive in Ser Barristan. Salmi sighed. It seems that Dorne is here, your Grace. The Red Viper, unless I miss my guess. Oberyn Martell, he agreed. Well, let's get down there. He quirked an eyebrow. I doubt that even the Red Viper will cause too much trouble here. Not here, not with all this happening. Your Grace, predicting what the Dornish will do is never a confident bet. Nevertheless, I will extend them every confidence. whilst watching them like a hawk. "I can do no other." He chuckled. "As a fellow Stormlander, I agree." Robb! It was a long morning, a morning that he wanted to be shorter with almost every moment. The wait for noon to arrive was almost agonizing. But the wait was important. There was so much to do, so much to organize, including his own wedding. He had to confess that matters were very different from his last one. He forced his mind away from that. Jane Westerling was in the past, so to speak. Matters like that made his head hurt at times, thinking about what was the past in his head and yet had been yet to come when he looked at the calendar. As Mother had pointed out, Grandfather would be in two minds over him, wedding an Umber who was also a wildling, or half a wildling. He didn't care. He loved Val, and she loved him, and that was that. It wasn't like before, when his choice of wife had been political or even a matter of life and death. Well, he had to admit that there was politics involved in his marriage. Him marrying Val meant another tie to Mance, now Lord Raider, and the wildlings as a whole. Jon marrying Yeardley might also get tongues wagging. But drawing the wildlings in and over the long term making them a part of the North as they should have been before things went wrong at the Wall so many centuries ago, that was a part of what he and Father had discussed, part of what they had agreed on as a long-term plan. Of course they had to survive the war at the Wall first. He turned his attention back to the desk and the endless flood of messages and decisions that would have to be made. Lord Reed reported that Moat Caelin's repairs were going well and that the cost was far less than had been feared. Lord Manderley reported that trade with the South and Essetes was most profitable, indeed, and that Cersei Lannister had been safely delivered to her new home off the coast of the Vale. That made his eyebrows go up and down. He wondered how she liked her new home. Hopefully she loathed it as being insufficiently grand for someone of her status. There had been at least one message from her escort saying that the bloody woman had tried to seduce various members of the group. They had been warned about that, and all distrusted her. He worried about what Father was going through in Old Town. The starry Sept would not have liked having to admit that other gods existed, let alone could be killed. He was very sure about that. He just had to hope that Father came home quickly, his business in the South taken care of. Starks did not prosper in the South. Burying himself back into the messages meant that time flowed freely, and before he knew it, Lewin was knocking on the door to the Solar. "Lord Robb, it is almost noon by my reckoning." He stood and nodded, his throat suddenly tight with tension. "Is everyone gathering?" "They are, including Quicksilver." Another nod and he strode out of the room, Lewin at his heels, Grey Wind following. When he reached the passageway to the doors, he could see the others waiting there. Mother at their head next to Val. Sansa was holding hands with Domeric. Arya and Bran looked excited. Tyrion looked as if he was slightly stunned. Why? Whilst Daisy looked as excited as Arya and Bran. The rest of the terrible foursome were there as well, whilst the castles were all assembled. Septa Mordane was even there, looking rather odd without her headdress, and then there was Quicksilver, who looked calm and composed. Based on what Daisy had quietly told him and a stunned mother, she might be destined to be Bran's bride. Rhaenyra, Bran, and Quicksilver opened the doors to the room with the chair, and as they all flooded in, Rhaenyra strode in at his side, and her hand reached out to squeeze his quickly in encouragement. "Magic," she whispered. "Conjured by my betrothed." She winked at him, and he smiled back at her, wanting to kiss her thoroughly. But then he looked at the stone chair and took a deep breath. And then he sat down in it, placing his arms on the stone armrests on either side. His nostrils flared for a moment as he took another breath, and then he looked around, curiously. "How does this work?" "The night fort is to our east. Your uncle should be already sitting in the chair, as their noon is slightly ahead of ours, and—" The doors suddenly slammed shut with a great squealing on hinges, and the lanterns that so many were bearing guttered and went out. It happened with a rapidity and speed that stunned them all to silence. And then, before anyone could say a word, Robb felt himself thrust back into the chair, as if a great hand had pushed him. He tried to say a word, but instead fell silent as all of a sudden the wall opposite seemed to slowly brighten, as if something was slowly, tentatively waking up. "What?" It was Tyrion speaking, but then his voice drained away. On the wall opposite, they could all see vague figures emerging from the darkness. As the seconds passed, as Robb could feel his heart beating, the light seemed to change and increase. There was a room now visible, with a chair that mirrored the one he was sitting in. A familiar room, the night fort. He could see Uncle Benjen sitting in the other chair, with the king standing next to him, the old bear and Maester Aemon on the other side, and close to them, an assemblage of the lords that had gone with them to the wall. Tywin Lannister was there, Lords Royce and Redfort, and a tanned, black-haired man was standing next to Sorella and staring straight at him. There was a long moment of silence, and then the king said, "Well, fuck me." Robb found himself gaping at the wall, and then he swallowed. "We heard that your grace," he said, and noted how everyone in the other room seemed to jerk back in shock. "And I can see that you can hear me." "Hey, we can." Uncle Benjen looked as if he was about to burst with pride. "By the old gods, it works." "After so long, indeed it does," Maester Aemon said. And Robb smiled as he heard how alive and vibrant the old Maester seemed, like a child discovering a great wonder. Then Maester paused. "Ah, Lord Robb, I see that you have a guest there. Would that be the child of the forest, of which your message spoke?" Quicksilver stepped forwards and bowed, her hands starting at her heart, and then spreading out in what almost looked like a ritualistic display. "You are the older dragonblood, Master Aemon. Yes, I see the younger one there as well. The crowned one, the Storm King." There was another moment of stunned silence as the people in the night fort stared at the child of the forest. The king's face seemed to go very red for a long moment, but then he seemed to take a deep breath. I am the Storm King of House Baratheon now, but also of House Durrandon, and yes, there is Targaryen blood within me, the blood of Valyria." Quicksilver straightened up. The Dragonbloods were very mighty once, but lost their way and broke their own lands under their very feet. Magic is to be used and not abused. It is a lesson that you must all learn. The two rooms seemed to stare at the child of the forest, and then she bowed at them all and stepped back. The king seemed to collect himself for a moment, and then stared at them all again at Winterfell, and then shook his head. "Gods, we can all see you, and you can see us. What a gift this is. It shortens communications in an instant." "As long as there is a Stark there," Uncle Benjen said dryly, and the king nodded and chuckled. "Aye, as long as there is a Stark in both chairs," he paused. "Were there any more chairs ever made? I can't remember ever seeing the like in Storm's End. Lords Lannister, was there ever one in Casterly Rock?" Tywin Lannister seemed to come out of what place he has retreated to in his own head, given his expression. "Sadly not, your grace. Only 2 were ever made," Quicksilver said, "grown out of the rock by Starks who were stone singers." The king nodded almost regretfully. "A shame, then, that more could not be made." Then he paused. "Or can they? Are there any stone singers left?" "No one knows just yet, your grace," Robb said hoarsely, not looking at Bran, whose mouth was hanging open at the sight of the room in the night fort. "But as old things are waking, perhaps that might as well." King Robert nodded slowly, and then clapped his hands together, something that seemed to make many in the room start. "Well, now, we should meet once a day, now that know that this works. Such a wonder, I can't imagine what Ned would say about it. A marvel. Now, any new news from the realm?" And so Luwin stepped forwards with the late's messages, and Robb sat there, feeling stunned. After a moment he felt Vatsand find his magic. She mouthed at him. He smiled back and then looked at the wall where the night fort was projected. "Yes, magic, and valuable. Yosi me!" The further north they rode, the more uneasy he felt about it all. It was a creeping feeling, a growing unease and worry that preyed upon his mind. There was something terrible up here in the snow and ice, amidst the trees. It could be all too quiet at times. Where were the birds, the animals, the direwolves? When they saw the great scar in the snow that showed the passage of thousands of feet, he felt true alarm kindle in his mind. The Green Man halted them the moment that they first saw the edge of it, and Jaime could see concern in his eyes for a moment before he relaxed a hair. "Wits were here driven by others," the old man muttered before tilting his head a fraction. "Heading west, not south." "Interesting." "Not headed for the wall," Brienne said, her own eyes narrowed. "Not yet, at least." "They're waiting for something," the Blackfish agreed. "The start of winter." Jaime pulled a face. "Such numbers. Why not attack now?" "They don't think like us, Sir Jaime," the Green Man rumbled as he gestured them forwards to cross the trampled snow and vegetation. "They've been patient for thousands of years, rebuilding their strength. What's more months to them? Nothing. Waits rot in heat. They'll wait until winter, until they're ready to bring winter south. And they can do that." Don't underestimate them. Bring winter south. He wanted to scoff, to laugh, and then he saw the look on the faces of the others. They were not scoffing. They were intent, in agreement. He swallowed his words and joined them in riding north across that scar in the snow, where here and there he could see the occasional wiggling thing on the ground that made him blanch and look away, fingers and toes. Blackened and rotted, but still, fingers and toes. God, how old were those things? They kept riding north, although there were times when he thought that the Green Man seemed to be wandering, searching, almost sniffing the air at times like a bloodhound in search of a trail. And then, as the sun started to head down towards the horizon, he seemed to stiffen in his saddle, and then led them in a brisk canter straight northeast. After a while, he could see a hill in the distance, heavily wooded, and he could see weirwood trees there. As they approached, he saw that the Green Man seemed to both relax a hair for a moment and then also gird himself. The Blackfish looked at the nearest weirwood tree, and then Yame blinked as he saw the carved face on it. It was a heart tree. This place is warded, the Blackfish said approvingly. Strongly, too, against whites and others. Brienne looked around as well, with the same look as the Blackfish had on his face. The Green Man turned in his saddle to look at them both, and then nodded with evident satisfaction. And then he pointed at a cleft in the hillside. There. As they rode towards it, Jaime realized that the entire area was encircled with weirwood trees, and from what he could see, were they all heart trees? Who warded this place? Wildlings? Green men? Neither, said the Green Man with an odd tone in his voice. Our hosts did. Our hosts? Jaime frowned. Who are they? They are our friends and not our enemies, so keep your hand from your sword, Sir Jaime Lannister. They call themselves those who sing the song of the earth, but we call them the children of the forest. And then he nodded at the cleft, and Jaime's eyes widened. There was a small figure standing there, at the opening, larger than a child, but not much more. The figure, was it female, was wearing a cloak of what seemed to be leaves, and its hair was red, brown, and gold, whilst its skin was brown, and it wasn't human. As they approached, the Green Man drew rein and then dismounted, before bowing to the little figure and speaking in a tongue that he had never heard of before. The short figure seemed to stiffen in shock for a moment, before bowing almost ceremoniously and then replying in what seemed to be the same tongue. Yadin could see the Blackfish and Brienne dismounting quickly and then craning their heads slightly to listen before then nodding slightly and looking at each other as if they were gleaning bits of it. As for Yinso, he sat there, feeling poleaxed on his horse for a long moment before dismounting himself. He felt almost clumsy from being so stunned. There had been word that the children of the forest were still around, but he'd almost scorned that, given that they had been unseen for so long. He could almost imagine Tyrion tutting over his head right now, telling him not to be so foolish. I shall speak your language so that you all can understand, the little creature said after a long moment. I am named Leaf, or that is the small word that summarizes my true name. She eyed the Green Man. We thought ourselves alone. You were not. The Isle of Faces and other secret places remained intact south of the wall. I know, or I know now. The sacrifice made by Rickon Stark will never be forgotten. We will sing his name for many years to come. Sing of what he did. The Green Man nodded somberly. He carried out his task. He was braver than many ever could be. And he will never be forgotten. We see each other again now, and the ways are open. Most of us here have gone south already. She smiled slightly. I remain to tend to Chi, who thought himself the last Green Seer. You have come in time. He does not have long left. I sense you have questions. We do. The Green Man turned to them all and then nodded. We have someone to meet. And then he led his horse and them all into the cleft. Pollard. 10 days. He was 10 days too fucking late. He had been away, traveling on business that had not been as successful as he might have hoped, and then came home to discover that his remaining family had not just been evicted, but his daughter almost sold into serfdom. And then worse, sent to King's Landing, sent to an establishment, sent to a whorehouse more like. She was too young for that. Too innocent. No, it was wrong. He had tracked her down, but then he had heard that she had died. Oh, it was an accident, the madam of the whorehouse had said. But he knew different. He knew the truth he had asked about, and he knew that the man who claimed to be a knight had killed her, all but murdered her because he liked his whores young. Well, now, he knew the name of the man, and now he knew his face. And now he had a knife in his hand, and the whoreson had his back to him, neck exposed above that white cloak as he strode to another whorehouse, and all he had to do was grab him and pull him into that alleyway, by that factor's office, and then plunge that knife in as hard as he could. And then he ran. Varys, as far as the people near the modest building near the docks of King's Landing were concerned, it was owned by a shipping factor called Telion, a man of Asauchi roots who traveled a lot, but who always eventually returned to his adopted home in the city. To become Telion meant wearing a rather scratchy wig, affecting a slight limp and perfecting the heavy scowl of someone who had many cares, which meant that it felt good to sit in the room at the top of the building, take off his wig, unfix his scowl, and raise a glass of wine to his own acquaintance. Rozier was a man who had also known Illyrio, who raised his own in salute and then sighed tiredly. "You are, I note, a little late in your voyage from Volantis and also look fatigued. May I ask why?" Grizzly sighed again. Essos is, well, on edge. Much is happening there, and you need to be aware of it all. For one thing, the Braviais have searched Pentos from the highest loft to the lowest undercroft, and are now so convinced that Daenerys Targaryen is not hidden in the city, that they are expanding their search to the outlying area, and they are sending many searching parties. A worm of unease went through him for a moment. They are that keen to find her? No, they are that keen to find her dragons. The Bravosi have dreams of the wonderful irony of using the last dragons of Valyria to crush the first daughter and the other colonies of Valyria. Dreams that drive them very much. They are searching very hard, and there is the danger. Varys frowned slightly. Danger? His old friend laughed harshly for a moment. Volantis knows that Braavos failed to capture Daenerys Targaryen and her dragons and are sending out their own search parties. So are the other free cities. Why should they not, the Dothraki, have vanished eastwards? About which I need to speak later. And whoever finds that girl and her dragons might tip the balance of the game of cities. And if some of those parties meet one another and clash and tempers are hot, or worse, someone finds the girl and her pets, well, blood will flow, and a war might start. The unease was stronger now. Matters are that tense. Rozier at least sighed again and then nodded. Volantis is beyond tense. They know that there's a war coming. They just don't know where from. Bravos taking Pentos again. Well, that's not unexpected. Throw in the Targaryen girl and her dragons. They see the threat, but what can Bravos have in terms of dragon riders in the future? More than enough dragon seeds either from Dragonstone or the Free Cities, or hoped for dragon seeds. You know how the Valyrians treated their slaves. The Bravosi have their hope, and Volantis knows that. No, matters are tense in Essos, and those search parties will scour the area, searching for the last Targaryen and her dragons. He nodded slowly. He might need to move the girl and her dragons, and soon. Then he frowned a little. You mentioned the Dothraki. Rozier Lys shifted in his seat a little. Odd tales from the Far East. I do not know how much credence to place in this, but there was rumor really, that one of the 5 forts had fallen to the Walking Dead. It was retaken. The word is, well, it's a strange enough tale that people are talking about it. Strange enough indeed. One of the 5 forts, beyond odd indeed. Please, pass on more if you hear anything. Recent events here have made me take tales of the Walking Dead more seriously. Matters north of the Wall have demanded the attention of the Crown here, and I have to say rightly so. Truly, Rhaelys looked unsettled. Truly, he said the word firmly. I have seen evidence of such, small cages filled with the moving parts of dead people. Rozier looked even more unsettled at that. Then I will keep an eye on many matters. He sighed again. The other reason why I'm late is that Volantis sent ships into Valyria to search for more Valyrian steel, and none returned, which should hint at how desperate some are getting. Indeed. He sipped some more wine and then nodded a little. Time to move more pieces on the board. And then he heard the sound of someone shouting outside the building and then others. Something seemed to be going on and he needed to find out what. Jon Arryn. He stared down at the scroll of paper that had once been wrapped around the leg of a raven and which was now in his hand. The words were tiny, written as small as possible while still being legible, and they spoke of, well, almost madness. But then what was life these days but a series of fantastic events, almost out of the Age of Legends? He remembered the first time that he laid eyes on Ned Stark, a boy who was trying, almost successfully, to hide how homesick and afraid he was. The words, "I am a Stark of Winterfell," were almost visible on his lips. That boy had become a man that he was very proud of, a man who was proven leader in battle, a father, the Lord of the North, the man who had sent the call, and now, the man who had killed a god. He sighed and kept on walking down the corridor. Ned had killed a god. A god. As a man of the Seven, the very thought made his skin crawl. How could a god die? How could a man kill a god? Could a man who killed a god be more than a man? He shivered for a moment. What he did know was that Rickard Stark would have been bursting with pride over his son. He had always known, or perhaps suspected, that Ned would always have been a better Lord of the North than Brandon. Rickard's first heir had been too impulsive, too wild, too ready to draw the sword before talking. Ned was a better man than Brandon, not that he meant to speak ill of the dead. As he walked into the room where what remained of the small council now met, he could see that Vax'Liod and Merryweather were talking with Pycelle, who looked grimly focused. "My lords, what has you so intent?" Valyrian looked up at him. "The number of madmen in the docks has increased, Lord Aaron. We have word of at least 100 men in the city who have lost their minds, screaming the same thing, that they cannot hear the voice of..." He held up the message in his hand. "The drowned god." "Yes." The three men stared at him in some shock. "Well," Pycelle said after a moment, looking far more focused than he normally did. "Yes, my lord." He strode forwards into the room and sat at the table there. "Word has come from the High Tower in Old Town. Ned Stark has killed the drowned god there, in the gate at the base of the High Tower." There was a stunned silence for a long moment, and then all three stood almost as one and either gaped at him or bellowed the word, "What?" He smiled thinly and then tossed the message down the table to Pycelle, who grabbed it quickly and read it. "My gods," he said eventually in a whisper, and passed the message on to the others, who almost tore it in two as they grabbed either end of it. That would explain much. If the madmen are all Ironborn. "In such numbers?" Merryweather asked, looking horrified. "Here in King's Landing?" "In any large town or city that has docks there are bound to be such people," Vax'Liod replied grimly. "The Ironborn often seem to intercept the choicest of cargoes with excellent knowledge of the ships and crews carrying it. They had intelligence from the docks. Yes, this explains much. But for a man to kill a god, how can this be?" Jon sat at the head of the table. The message speaks of a detailed report coming from the High Tower, written by the new Lord Hightower. He shook his head for a moment, and the mention of Leighton Hightower dying in a fight against Euron Greyjoy, by all the gods, more strangeness. "I hope that Old Town sends a courier on a fast horse. This will be a tale for the ages." "My apologies, my lords, for my tardiness," came a voice to one side, and he saw Varys hurrying in. "I heard a song from Issus that demanded my attention, and then I heard of an event at the docks that needs to be brought to your attention. If it's madmen that turned out to be Ironborn, we are ahead of you." "There for once, Varys," Jon said. "It seems that Pike had more of a presence here in King's Landing than we thought. I wonder where else men have gone mad once they no longer heard the voice of their now dead god. Old Town? Driftmark? Planky Town?" Royce frowned as he sat. "I'm sorry, Lord Aaron, dead god." Pycelle handed the Master of Whispers the scroll. "There has been a fight at the base of the High Tower. Lord Leighton Hightower lost his life battling against Euron Greyjoy, before Lord Stark drove him away, and then Lord Stark killed the drowned god." Varys read the scroll in obvious astonishment, the most obvious emotion that Jon could remember seeing on a eunuch's face since the first cage containing a white's head had arrived. "Gods, one of my little birds sang a song to me that Old Town was much on edge. But I think that this more detailed report that is on the road cannot get here sooner." Jon nodded and then made a mental note that Ned only had one daughter so far, who was not betrothed, and several sons. Many lords would be beating a path to Ned's door to arrange marriage alliances. He hoped that young Robert was making friends at Winterfell. Ned Stark, the Godslayer. Yes, House Stark would be prominent indeed if they won this war. "My lords," he said quietly, "I think that it would be a wise idea that the small council move to a more northerly location as soon as practicable. I myself will be heading first for the Vale to complete certain duties that must be done before winter arrives, and then for Winterfell. I think that White Harbor might be a suitable place initially. We will need to consult with His Grace, the King, and the Hand, of course, on this. The kingdom must be run from a place that has adequate communications, of course." "I agree," said Merryweather at once. whilst Valerian simply nodded. Pierxel looked mullish for a moment. The man liked some degree of routine in the Red Keep, including visits from women of a certain establishment, but then nodded reluctantly. Varys frowned a little. I will have to make some adjustments to my system. My little birds fly to me here in King's Landing, so it will take a while to get them to send their songs to a new location. But that can be arranged, I think. He coughed delicately and arched his eyebrows at Jon, who remembered that he had spoken of other news. You mentioned Essos and the docks, Lord Varys. Essos is in some degree of ferment, or potential ferment. The Braavosi are new convinced that Daenerys Targaryen and her dragons are not carefully hidden in Pentos, but escaped somewhere. They are searching for her extensively, I am told. And I am also told that Volantis knows this and is seeking her as well, as are, no doubt, the other free cities and other powers. Valerian groaned. So, men from many cities, all armed, all searching, all potentially clashing. Exactly, Lord Vieira, and Varys grimaced a little. War could break out quite easily, especially if someone finds her. Jon sat back in his chair and steepled his fingers under his nose as he thought hard. Varys, if she is out there in the area around Pentos, could your little birds find her? Her dragons must be growing by now. Varys furrowed his brow for a moment. I can ask my little birds to search. If we had a good guess as to where she might have fled to, that might help. But Esselise is all large and months have passed, so he threw his hands in the air in a gesture of worry. Even if we found her, what would we do with her? Valerian asked the question carefully. Jon had a strong suspicion why. The Valerians of Driftmark had the blood of Valyria within them, and he had often wondered if they were Targaryen loyalists. He tapped a finger on the table as he thought. This is a matter for his grace, however. Daenerys Targaryen's dragons might be a weapon against the others on the wall. Some accommodation might be reached with the girl, with legal restrictions put in place. After all, she is the last Targaryen, apart from Maester Aemon on the wall. So, have your little birds search Varys. Let us know if they need reinforcements. And she is nothing more than a girl, Merryweather pointed out. She could be married into a great house quite easily. He caught their looks and flushed a bit. I know that it might be hard to arrange. Jon raised an eyebrow and made yet another mental note to keep an eye on Merryweather. The man was a good master of coin, but somewhat blunt in terms of the finer matters of politics. Then he looked back at Varys. And the matter from the docks? Yes. Varys pulled a slight face. I regret to say that Sab Roseblodin is dead. He was knifed in the neck by a man dressed in dark robes, almost at the door of a particularly insalubrious establishment that dealt in, young girls. He died quite quickly, I am told. Jon felt his nostrils flare for a long moment, and then he sighed. Blondin had never been really worthy of the white cloak, and Robert had written to him that Selmy was working on a plan to change the Kingsguard. Well, this made it a little easier. Surely. Yaxley, as they walked the horses deeper into the cleft, he could see that it was becoming a tunnel, and a wide one at least, at the start. There was a place where they could unsaddle the horses and leave them munching on what looked like oats, although where the oats had come from baffled Jaime. The short creature, the child of the forest called Leaf, had pulled out a bag of them and tossed them to him. For your steeds. And then they descended further down into the tunnel, which narrowed sharply here and there. The roots of weirwood trees ran everywhere, and several times he almost caught his foot in one and stumbled. Their way was lit by the occasional sconce with a flickering candle, and then strange things that glowed, like mushrooms of a kind he had never seen and did not want to touch. Every now and then they passed an opening to a cave where white bone gleamed in the limited light, sometimes of huge skulls, that of giants, and sometimes smaller ones. He shivered a little at the sight. So many graves are close to that of so many creatures. Leaf scurried ahead of them, showing them the way, and he'd turn sometimes to see how they were doing in the narrow parts. The Blackfish and Brienne were navigating everything with just the occasional stumble. But the Green Man, he seemed to never put a foot wrong, ducking under every hanging root. He swallowed a little. There was a child of the forest, something that father would once have dismissed as a grumpkin or a snark in front of him. He raised his eyebrows for a moment, thinking that Tyrion would be scribbling notes and barking questions right now. Instead, it was him, stumbling about against roots and wondering what the musty smell was. Eventually, Leaf slowed and then gestured them into another cave, and his breath caught in his throat. The cave was a large one, with what looked like a great dark abyss next to it, and he could hear water flowing somewhere far below them. And by a natural bridge over the abyss was, well, it looked like a throne of white weirwood roots, and on it was a corpse, dressed in rotted black robes. The skin was white, the hair was silver, and the roots of the throne seemed to be wrapped about the corpse, and even seemed to be growing inside it. If this was Brynden Rivers, Bloodraven, then he was dead, and had been for a while. Lee for some reason led them right to the corpse, and he was about to turn and jape that. What? They were there to talk to a dead man when all of a sudden the corpse opened one red eye and looked at him in a way that make his guts almost curdle. He was alive. How could the man be alive? There was a root to going through his other eye. Duncan! The man in the weirwood throne said the single word in a voice as dry and dusty as an ancient tomb. The green man walked forwards and looked at the figure on the throne with what looked almost for a moment like pity in his eyes. Brynden. How? Yaemi asked in a voice that wavered far too much for his own liking. Can he still be alive like that? That seemed to amuse the person that had once been Brynden Rivers. Determination, it rasped slowly. The Isles of Faces was denied to me. The green man shook his head a little. It was never denied to you, not truly, but you never chose the right time or asked the right questions. So here we are, and we must talk. Grizzly. He looked about his solar in Storm's End and then sat and sighed in the great chair behind the desk. The trip from King's Landing had been a fast one and a safe one. No storms had threatened their passage. The trio of ships that had taken his company south to his family seat. And there he had to face reality. The reality that was the stormlands that he ruled. The reality that Uncle Eldon had made him face. It was not as bad as he had thought. No, it was worse. He had been home for 2 days, and during those 2 days he had realized that he had been a fool indeed. The stormlands doubted him. That was the best that he could say based on the initial soundings that he had taken, but it was more what had not been said that had alarmed him. It was the looks that slid around him, uneasily. The flicks of the eyes away from him, the glances of men over their shoulders when they heard him approaching, and the sense that they were talking about him and would now pretend to be discussing something else. Little things, but they added up into something that gave him a growing sense of unease and alarm. The day after he had gotten back to Storm's End, he had discussed the organization of the muster that would take place once Robert gave the word. Such a mobilization would not be easy. The Stormlands had not gone to war on such a scale since the rebellion. Since the Greyjoy idiocy had been mostly a naval war, and a great deal would have to be organized ahead of time. And his initial decisions had been, well, eyebrows had been raised. With Penrose and Winterfell still mentoring Edric, the deputy castellan of Storm's End was Ser Brynden Stedman, the brother of Lord Stedman, and he was not a man to mince his words. He had pointed out that the war that was coming on the wall could not be a war of cavalry, or indeed of chivalry. It would be instead a war of survival. And so, when Rensley had talked about moving Stormlords to the north and talking of cavalry formations, Stedman's eyebrows had drawn down as he pointed out facts and figures in reality. He could tell that Stedman and others thought that he was greener than grass. And then there was the other word that hung in the air. Robert, he was being compared to his brother, again and again. And he had a feeling that he was falling short. Robert had Stormbreaker. Robert was on the wall, being king. Robert was virile, had children. And he, Renly, had... what? What legacy did he have? What legacy could he leave? House Baratheon had 3 heads at the moment, and Robert had legitimized 3 of his bastards, and who knew what he had in mind for them. Stannis had Shireen, and his wife was pregnant again, and what did he have? Nothing. Not yet. He needed to show the world something. He needed to show his Stormlords something. He needed an heir. He felt his fingers as they drummed on the table, and then there was a knock on the door. He stood. Enter. Lord John Kellington walked in, bowed his head formally, and then closed the door behind him. Lord Baratheon, you requested to see me. He smiled, nodded, and then poured them both a goblet of wine from the decanter that he had set out earlier to breath. You are, I believe, a lover of wine. Let us see what you make of this. He handed over the goblet. Kellington took the goblet, peered into it, sniffed it, and then sipped it. A most noble red wine, but I cannot place it. Is from the southern Stormlands laid down by my father almost 30 years ago. I was told that it is now ripened almost fully. Kellington sipped again and then smiled. You honor me. Your father knew and loved his wine. If he laid it down to ripen over so long, he must have had great confidence in it. My thanks, you do me much honor. As they both sat, Rensley smiled slightly. You knew my father well. I did. I squired for him many years ago now. The day that news came of his death, it was like a physical blow. He was a good man. If he had lived, perhaps the rebellion might not have happened. Perhaps it was inevitable. But if he had lived then, he would have been king instead of Robert. He paused, smiling. He would have been a good king, too, a reluctant one. He frowned slightly. I don't understand. Lord Kellington smiled, his eyes far away, lost in memories for a heartbeat. Some men who dream of or expect power like that of a king should never be allowed anywhere near it, and others who avoid it make better use of it when granted it. Risley thought of that god, though unexpected for a moment, and then nodded thoughtfully. And then he cleared his throat. Lord Kellington, there is something I need to ask you. The older man stilled in an instant and put his goblet down. I did suspect that, and I think I know what. You wish to ask for the hand of my Bethany. He blinked and nodded. I do. I have come to deeply appreciate her wit, her beauty, and her intelligence. I wish her to be my wife. But you expected me to ask this. I did. Bethany told me that she suspected that you would ask me for her hand. And then Kellington stared at him, his blue eyes hard and intent. Lord Baratheon, there are certain matters of which I must speak with you. He suppressed a sigh. And here it came, such as... The older man sighed openly and gustily, and his eyes flickered about the room in a way that was all too familiar to Rensley before returning to him. We will speak of this but once, and that time is here, and now. There are rumors, Lord Baratheon, and more than rumors. There are tales of things that people have heard of and seen, of things that have not been discreet. He felt his blood almost freeze in his veins for a moment, and then he flickered an eyebrow at Kellington. I think I know of what you speak. There is, at the very least, talk of a petition. Kellington's brows lowered. One at least, from certain lords, asking his grace to make Adric Baratheon your heir until you can provide one of your own. Hence, I think your need to marry my Bethany. He repressed the rage he still felt at that mention of such a petition, and merely nodded choppily. Yes, he said, the word hoarsely. I have heard other rumors, my lord, Kellington said, the words remorselessly. Rumors that make me wary of giving my permission. Yes, Bethany would make a wonderful Lady Baratheon of Storm's End. She's clever and wise, but I would have her happy, content, with children, and not doubtful of who her husband really loves. My Bethany is more than clever. I have 3 sons and 1 daughter, and that daughter is more intelligent and more observant than many people that I have ever known. She would know falsehood in a moment if it is spoken to her. Lord Baratheon, we are both Stormlords. Stormlords are not like the flowery cunts in the Reach. We are blunt, and we tell the truth. I would have the truth from you. What does Loras Tyrell mean to you? He swallowed for a long moment. He is someone, he said eventually, that I will not see again. Someone that I thought that... He pulled his attention together. He means nothing to me now, and if you wish me to swear so, then I shall. He meant it. He had to let go of the past. He had to let go of Loras. Gods. It hurt, but there was no choice. Kellington stared at him, and then looked away for a moment. I understand, and you must understand that, if I agree to this marriage, then Bethany will have to help you rebuild your position in other ways. The rumors, well, people talk of Robert and not of you, of Stormbreaker, and of him becoming the Storm King of legend, however that might happen. They do not talk of you in that way. Rensley sighed a little. He had a feeling that there was more coming. He was right. The older man shook his head a little as if in astonishment of the oddness of it all, and then he looked back. I have heard of another loyal petition, one that Lord Yastermont might not mention to you because he has not heard of it yet. There is talk of appealing to his grace to take the Stormlands under his personal control again as his personal domain. Rage took him for a moment, and he forced himself to stop the death grip on the arms of his chair. That would be something that his grace would see as a direct insult to you and therefore to House Baratheon, and he'd crush the head of anyone who would mention it. Kellington tilted his head. Only 2 fools have mentioned this folly to me. I told them that they were idiots. Hopefully others will do the same to those who propose this folly. But the more time passes without you acting on this matter of marrying and getting an heir, the more people will think and talk about it. And someone, at some point, will do something stupid. You talked of rebuilding my position, Rexley said, hoarsely, fighting to get his temper back under control. There was a long moment of silence in the room. Lord Baratheon, I must again be blunt. There is doubt in the minds of many, of your storm lords, that in this great war that is to come on the wall, this war where we will fight creatures from some of the oldest legends in Westeros, this war that we must win, or we will be nothing more than walking dead corpses covered in ice and snow if we lose, that the Stormlands can even play their part if we are led by a sword-swallowing pillow-biter. If you marry my daughter, you must prove that you are not those 4 words, and that you are committed to your wife, my Bethany, and her alone. That is my one demand. I would have her happy. Making her so before the eyes of the Storm Lords would cause the rumors to be doubted, and that is where I stand. Do you agree? The words hung in the air, like iron chains around him. The blood was thundering in his veins, and he wanted to rip the chair he was sitting in apart, as he fought to keep the famous Baratheon temper under control. Things were even worse than he could thought in his worst nightmares, but Bethany Kellington gave him a chance now. A chance to keep Storm's End under his control, and the Stormlands. Swallowing his temper, he stood up, and then held out his hand. I agree. Kellington stood as well. You agree? I do. I would swear it, if need be, in the chamber where the Durrandons lie, where Stormbreaker was found. Kellington's gaze searched his face. And then he took his hand. Then we have a wedding to plan, and right fast. Winter is coming. Ned. They left 2 hours before the dawn, a quiet cavalcade of horsemen who met at the docks of Old Town and then trotted north up the road to the gate there. There was no point in hiding who he was. A cloak and a hood would not have helped. The huge direwolf loping along by his side meant that the few people around at that hour knew who he was in an instant. Which was why he was leaving the city so early. He had no intention of causing any trouble by calling attention to himself. He knew full well that the Starry Septal was still in a ferment, that certain septums were trying to deny the truth, whilst others acknowledged what he had done at the High Tower. It was politics and religion, all mashed into one horrible mess, and he had no intention of making anything worse for the new Lord Hightower, as he stepped into his late father's place and did his best to cope with what was coming. Rillus Tyrell rode by on one side, with Sir Garth Hightower on the other, followed by his own men. As they rode along the road, he could hear the first calls of Stark, Stark, long live Lord Stark, start to rise up as the fisher folk and early dawn merchants started to cry his name. Others started to take up the call, and he winced a little. It was too early for word to reach the Starry Septon, those power-hungry buggers. That said, as they rode, the call was heard by a growing number, and he raised a hand in acknowledgement as people started to open their windows and peer out at the noise. He glanced at Lord Tyree, who nodded, and the trot became a slow canter. The cheers were starting to wake more and more people, and he really wanted to be gone. The problem was that Old Town was a big city, and even at a canter their progress was not as fast as he might have hoped. Uncle Baylor has my full support, Ned, Wellis said as he looked to one side at the shape of the Starry Septon at distance. There were lights being kindled in there. If more fools arrive to cleanse the gate, he'll tell them to bugger off. You're right, though. Best to leave before more ferment in the city. He nodded, and then sighed in relief as he saw the north gate ahead of them. The gates were already open, and there were guards there. The tumult was still building, but much of it was behind them as the city started to wake. He was warier of ambushes than he had been before, after that battle against Euron Greyjoy at the base of the High Tower. Stark! 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 The cries were all around him, and he winced again before sending a quick look at Willis, who grinned at him. We all owe you much, Ned. I'm more worried about the aftermath and the Starry Bloody Septon. Fools will ever be fools, Ned. He laughed, and then they were through the gates, and the road was open before them, with just a few wagons leaving the city with their cargoes of goods. North, it was, for a while, and then east, to what had once been the Tower of Joy, that place of cursed memory, because he had to do his duty, like a Stark. Jizia! The cavern was warmer than he first thought, and like the others he took off his cloak as they settled around the weirwood throne with the man who should have long been dead by the look of him. The green man had shot the near corpse a look of almost pity as he took down his hood and then removed his cloak. Jaime jerked his head to one side. The green man walked over to him as the blackfish and his wife settled themselves on the ground at the base of the throne and looked at them with similar quizzical glances. "Why are we here? What answers can he possibly tell us?" The green man directed a level look at him. "More than you think, Sarvingmai. Now." He looked to one side, and Jappy flinched slightly as he realized that Leaf had approached on noiseless feet and was standing next to them, holding a carved wooden bowl with something in it. "Eat this. Sit down and grasp a root." He peered at what was in the bowl. "Is that paste?" "Very good, Sir Akamai. Weirwood seeds. You will need them to see the way." The green man smiled briefly, patted up his cloak, and sat down at the base of the throne. "I will need them? Not you and the Uth?" His breath caught in his throat as he realized that the Blackfish and Brienne of Tarth were both motionless, their eyes complete white. "We've danced this dance before." "You haven't?" "Not really. Eat the paste, sit down, and grasp a root. Now." He ate the paste quickly, shivering a little at the note of command in the old man's voice, and then sat down. The ground was rough, and he shifted a little, before grabbing a white root. Now, darkness surrounded him, and he fell into it. He didn't know how long he fell, or for how long, but suddenly, with a jerk like the parting of drapes, light returned, blinding light, and he held a hand in front of his eyes and blinked. He was in the throne room of the Red Keep, before the hulking thing that was the Iron Throne, but it was not the room that had seen recently. No. It was the room as he had first seen it, with monstrous dragon skulls on the walls and the banners of the Targaryens hanging between them. How is this possible? He looked about the great room, which was empty of anyone else and silent. Because this place exists in both our heads, Lanster. He turned swiftly at the voice. It came from the Iron Throne, in which a white-haired man dressed in red and black was sitting, a sword across his lap. He blinked. The man was younger and had both his eyes, but it seemed to be the near corpse on the weirwood throne. "You're Brynden Rivers." Bloodraven was the name. He remembered the tales now. Stood easily and strode down the steps of the Iron Throne, with what looked like practiced grace, sheathing the sword in a scabbard that hung by his side as he did. "I don't look the same," he gestured at one of the windows, and Jaime could see for a moment the silent figure of the near corpse on the white throne. He grinned. "You're only as old as you think at times." Jaime took a step back. He had no words for this. "Why am I here?" This seemed to cause the albino man a moment of deep thought. "Why indeed are you here? Looking at you, knowing what you've done. Gods, is this what House Lannister is reduced to? Your ancestors must be raging, boy, to have dragged the name of House Lannister through so much mud and still have a head on your shoulders." He shook his head. "If I had been Hand of the King when your crimes were revealed, then you would have died. Simple as that." "Crimes?" He opened his mouth. But then another voice interrupted. "Leave the boy alone, Brynden." The green man strode forwards, as he had been in the cavern, and Jaime looked at the both, confused by the difference. "We're not here to judge him." "Then why is he here?" "He has potential." Bloodraven scoffed. "Potential? The boy can't see beyond the end of his nose and is too impulsive." Anger stirred within him. He was not a boy. "He has changed," the green man said as he strode up to them. "He can change more." Bloodraven looked at Jaime with what looked like disgust. "You always were the optimist, Duncan. Too fond of broken things. The boy is a fool. How many times has he failed people?" "I am not a boy, and I am standing right here." The words boiled out of him, bitter and angry. They both looked at him, and he felt himself shrivel in fear. For a moment they both seemed to be huge and gigantic, with eyes that burned with red and green fire, whilst he was but a child. And then the moment was gone. "Given our ages," the green man said quietly, "you are indeed merely a boy." Then he looked at Bloodraven again. "I think that he can learn." "Can he?" The albino looked at Jaime and then placed both hands on the pommel of his sword and stared at him. "Jack Jaime Lannister, who veers from doing the right thing, killing that mad lunatic, Aerys Targaryen, to doing the wrong thing, like not telling anyone why, who left the wildfire under King's Landing, and who betrayed his next king by committing treason against him. He can learn. He's come a long way. The Green Man looked at him levelly. Bloodraven sighed. I have known many people in my life, he said, eventually, and I have long known that what truly defines people is how they deal with the shadows that lie within them. The thin room seemed to darken for a long moment, as if a great cloud was passing in front of the sun. Some call those shadows demons. Bloodraven was looking at him now, his red eyes hard and judgmental. Whatever you want to call them, they're always there. Baser desires, impulses, the darkness that so many of us have. Some of us fight those shadows. Some deny that they exist, and some not just embrace them, but clothe them and feed them, like my father did. So, how have you dealt with your shadows, Jaime Lannister? What have you done to fight your baser desires? He swallowed, feeling genuinely speechless as Bloodraven's words struck at the core of his being. He had no words, and he could tell by the mocking smile that the albino knew. Bloodraven gestured at the nearest window again, and he looked up to see himself in the cell at Winterfell again, facing Robb Stark and his direwolf again. Robb Stark called you the kind of man who would throw little boys out of windows. Are you not that man? Bloodraven's voice was harsh and pitiless. He finally found his voice. No, he swallowed. I've never done that. But you have, in a way. In this time, how many servants stumbled onto you and suspected something, but your sister told you that she would take care of them? What did you think? That they were sent away to a farm somewhere, like an old dog? The window changed again, becoming an image of a guard in Lannister red heaving a body down a shaft and then being rewarded with a kiss by Cersei. And then the same guard peering down the shaft and then being hit on the back of the head by his sister with a large and battered candlestick. The guard fell, his head hitting the wall of the shaft and then vanishing. But he had no words. Then he rallied. I never threw any boy out of any window. The throne room blurred for a moment and was then replaced by a much smaller room. He blinked as he saw the figures within it. Cersei was there, wrapped in a sheet. Brandon Stark was there in the window. And then there was himself. He was dressed in a shirt only, looked tousled and tired, and then the words, "The things I do for love," were spoken. Bran Stark was pushed out of the window, his face astonished as he disappeared downwards. He almost screamed in horror and darted towards the window, and then they were back in the throne room. He reeled. That never happened. I did not do that. In this time, no, you were not given the chance to do so. But can you deny that if that was the only way to hide your treason with your sister, you would not have done that? Really? Bloodraven's words were implacable, merciless. Is that not what you are? All your life you've been impulsive, reckless, unable to see the implications of what you do. We have been diverted from a future that is closed to us now, after the old gods brought Robb Stark back from the moment of his death. Let us see what would have awaited you in that time, shall we? Everything blurred, and suddenly he was watching himself again, slightly bearded and ragged, taunting and mocking a man who looked like an Asozi sellsword, who then bade his men grab him and hold out his right arm so that his hand could be severed. He almost screamed at the sight, watching the other him bellow with anguish. More blurring than himself again, one bandaged stump against his chest as he rode, bearded and despairing, down a road, escorted by a battered Brian of Tarth. Again, blurring, and then he was standing at the man gate to Riverrun, facing a stone-faced blackfish, his right hand a golden mockery of a live one. I give you my word of honor that... Your honor? You have no honor, boy. Don't you realize that? Kingslayer, Oathbreaker, Sister Fucker, which one is it? What should we call you? If we surrender to you, we're as good as dead. The phrase will murder us all. Once you are gone, back to the warm embrace of your sister's thighs. Don't lie to me. Your word is worthless. All of Westeros knows that. What next? Threaten Edmure with the murder of his wife and son. That confirms your lack of honor. You're not a man, Lannister. You're vermin. A slug. Now fuck off and go away, you worthless cunt. Sieges are dull, and I've taken your measure, and I'm disappointed. Everything shook again, and they were back in the throne room. After a long moment, he cleaved his tongue off the top of his mouth, as he realized that he was on his knees. He struggled upright to stand on trembling legs. What was that? A truthful series of moments, from different times at different moments. Bloodraven smiled at him. Cynically. So, are you better than that? or not. You know what you could be. Can you be better? He sank to his knees again, overwhelmed and weeping, before he rallied and scrubbed at his face for a long moment, as the images flashed through his mind. How can I be? Fight your shadows, battle them, spit in their faces, and perhaps you might achieve your potential. Bloodraven looked at the Green Man. Enough? The Green Man looked at him. Perhaps. He clenched his fists. I will fight this. I will fight my shadows. I swear it. You swear this oath. He could not tell who asked it. I swear it. Break it, and you die. I swear it. And then red fire was all around him, and he cried out before falling into darkness again. Jon Stark. They sailed away from Pike at dawn, a small flotilla of ships, all headed for the north. Word had come that Westwatch by the bridge was manned again, with anxious watchers with marish eyes peering west to make sure that no more icebergs with others and whites drifted south again. He and Yaxley were on Asha Greyjoy's ship, the Lady of Pike herself, commanding as she needed to bend the knee to King Robert and find out how the Iron Islands could now help. The Reader had been left behind in Pike to command in her place, and they knew that he would make sure that all was well. They even had a cabin to themselves, and it was there that were now as the ship rose and fell in the waves and Yarka turned a bit pale at the motion. I'd rather be on deck, she said hoarsely. Why are we here? Because there's something I need to show you. She looked at him owlishly. Now? The way my stomach feels right now, no. You might think that fucking me would take my mind off feeling seasick, but it really bloody won't. He looked up from where he was rummaging in his backpack and looked at her. What? No. He reached down and pulled out the wrapped oval shape that he had hidden in the backpack for so long. Here, he said, as he handed it carefully over to her. Look at that. Ygritte peered at him for a moment and then unwrapped it slowly. When she saw the first glittering swirls of the dragon egg, she gasped. It's beautiful. Then her forehead wrinkled. But what is it? It's something I needed to show you here, somewhere private, where no one can overhear us. It's a secret. You can't tell anyone about it. It's important to Ygritte. It's a dragon egg. Confused, she looked at it again, and then at him, and then back to the egg. I don't understand. He sighed and then took her hand as he sat next to her. I will hold no secrets from you. You are my wife. I love you. But this is something that you must know. Ned Stark is not my father. His wife stared at him, and then she laughed. Give over. Of course he is. You look just like him. You're a Stark to your fingertips. Why would you say otherwise? He winced. I am a Stark, just not Ned Stark's son. My mother was Lyanna Stark. Ygritte frowned at him. The one who was abducted by the Mad King's son? Yes, he looked at the floor, his cheeks heating with shame. She went willingly at first. She believed his lies. But then, when word came of the death of her father and her brother, she wanted to leave, and he wouldn't let her. He held her against her will, and then he stopped. His words no more than a choked-off whisper. After a moment, he rallied. He had his Kingsguard hold her down and spread her legs, and I was the result. There was a moment of horrified and utter silence between them both. You're the son of the Dragon Prince, the one that died on the Trident. I'm his bastard son, Ned Stark, who I love as a father saved me by claiming that I was his bastard instead, because otherwise I'd have been murdered, or so he feared. Murdered? Gritter was as white as a sheet, and her hand shook in his. But when Cersei Lannister married the king, after Rhaegar's other children were murdered, do you think that cold-fucked Tywin Lannister would not have had me killed if he had known of my existence? I would have been knifed and left to die. And King Robert hated Rhaegar. My father, Ned Stark, couldn't take the chance. He took a deep breath into his lungs and then looked at Ghost, who was watching him from the corner of the cabin, his red eyes unblinking. So now you know. Another long moment of silence followed. Who else knows? Lady Stark, Robb, Uncle Benjen, a few on the wall, including Maester Aemon, who gave me the egg and my sword, and the king too. He knows now. He met my mother in Winterfell in a dream that I'm not sure was a dream. She begged for my life. He granted it. As long as I don't try and become king myself, I'm not a threat to him, but it's still a secret. Too many idiots out there. Too many fools. She looked at him, her hands tightening on his. Ned Stark is your father. I've seen the way he worries about you, cares about you, loves you. You're his son, and that's that. She looked at the dragon egg. What about this, then? What do we do about it? It was Aemon's, he said after a long moment. I don't know what to do with it. He put both hands on it. For all I know, it's stone now. Daenerys Targaryen might have her own dragons now, but... He paused. For a moment, the egg had almost felt warm. But we don't. Yaxley nodded slowly. Then she blinked. John? Yes? Pass that pail. Seeing how green she suddenly was, he did so, taking the egg from her and holding it close to him as she stared at the bottom of the pail and visibly tried to discipline her stomach. It might be a long trip for her. Yummy. He came awake with a start, sweat on his brow and his hands shaking as if he had an ague. After a long moment he controlled himself and then swallowed. The others were still sitting around him, their eyes white, whilst the near corpse on the weirwood throne just sat there, eye closed. Gods, what he had seen. He almost wanted to empty his stomach on the ground next to him. He was not that man. He was not someone who pushed little boys out of windows. He wasn't. But it was that little insidious word, that word that whispered in his ear. He had believed Cersei's promises of dealing with servants that had seen them. Like a fool, he believed her whilst also knowing the truth, deep down inside himself. Oh, he'd known. Here. He started violently. Leaf was squatting to one side of him, the bowl with the remains of the weirwood paste in one hand as she offered it to him again. She'd appeared almost out of nowhere, and he looked at her in confusion as she tilted her head and looked him up and down. What are you looking at? A slight smile crossed her face. I've heard songs sung of people who have sworn oaths on the Fist of Winter. I'd just never seen one before. It hangs on you. What hangs on me? She looked at him as if he was an idiot. The curse, of course. Break your word and you die. Now, eat again. They're waiting for you. He took the bowl with a shaking hand. Yes, of course he was cursed. What else could it be? He sighed, scooped the remaining paste out and ate it, grimacing a little at the taste. And then he closed his eyes and grasped the white root again. When he opened his eyes again, he was back in the throne room of the Red Keep, and with 4 people now looking at him. The Green Man and Bloodraven were in the same places as before, but now the Blackfish and Brienne of Tarth were standing there as well. The Blackfish with his arms folded and a scowl on his face as he looked at him. Ah, did you know? Peace, husband mine, Brienne muttered. You cannot punish him for something he has not done, nor will ever do. Now, hi, the Blackfish said after a long moment. I know. Then he looked at the Green Man. What now? But it was Bloodraven who replied with a short and sardonic laugh as he sat down at the base of the Iron Throne. And now you ask the questions you came here to ask. Euron Greyjoy, the Green Man said curtly. You taught him, did you not? Bloodraven closed his eyes for a long moment and then sighed. I feared you would ask about him. When he opened his eyes, there was deep tiredness in them. And at least you came in time for me to warn you about him. In time? Brienne asked, her head tilted to one side. Oh yes, Bloodraven's smile was bitter, and then he pointed at the Blackfish. Time. It has been taken from me and given to you. Did you think that the gray disappearing from your hair was natural? The old gods give with one hand and take with another. They brought Robb Stark back and took the life of Ramsay Snow. They gave Aemon his sight back at the cost of some mad septon in the Riverlands. And they shortened my life to extend yours, Blackfish. Brynn and Tully looked genuinely stunned at that. I did not ask them to. I swear. Peace! Bloodraven waved a hand. I know it is the old gods and their balance. You said that before, Jaime blurted. About Robb Stark? What happened? Bloodraven just looked at him, his eyebrows raised. You do not know? You were not told? He wasn't ready, sighed the Green Man. His brother knows, and his father can never know. That one hoards hatred like a fine wine. This seemed to amuse Bloodraven. Very well, Robb Stark has memories from the future in which you pushed his brother Brandon out of that window. He did not truly know that you did it, but he knew enough. He fought a war that was started when Joffrey, your idiot son, chopped off the head of Ned Stark in King's Landing after Ned Stark was betrayed by many people. Robert Baratheon was dead, killed in a hunting accident. Joffrey was king. Ned Stark knew about the incest. Jon Arryn had discovered it, but was dead, and Stannis Baratheon knew as well. War followed, as bad as the Dance of Dragons, and all the time the others marched on the wall and the North was neglected. Robb Stark died, his death orchestrated by your father, and was sent back to stop disaster. He stood there almost reeling. Thoughts. Joffrey as king? That imbecile? He knew then. Robb Stark. When he called me what he called me. He knew, the Blackfish said, the words in a voice like stone. Why didn't he kill me? Because he's better than you. The Blackfish turned back to Bloodraven. Euron Greyjoy. There was a long moment of silence. He came here without being summoned. I thought it was destiny. I was looking for a successor without realizing that I had made many mistakes. I should have asked Cold Hands about his mission. I should not have accepted his service without wondering why he was the way that he was. I did not realize that the Isle of Faces still had singers on it. He arrived and wanted to learn, and after a while I realized that he wanted to learn all the wrong things. All he wanted to learn was how to steal power. He did not care about the Song of Ice and Fire. He did not want to defend against the others and their whites. He just wanted to know how to take as much power, magic, if you want to call it that, into himself. He was greedy beyond belief. I drove him away when I realized what he was. Why? The Green Man barked the question. What is his goal? Bloodraven tilted his head to one side. Have you seen the death of the drowned god yet? Not yet. The grief of the old gods is still thick. I watched it as it happened. Greyjoy tried to be there. He almost killed Ned Stark, but was beaten by him after Leighton Hightower laid down his life for the Lord of the North. It was the one time that I'd been able to see him in years. He sought the power of the drowned god. He wanted to absorb it. The man is always looking for the next rung on the ladder of ambition. No matter how high that next rung is, he's always grasping for it. But he failed. The drowned god is dead, and Ned Stark still lives. His ambition is still great. Do you think that he will stop now? He'll try again. He'll reach out and try to absorb more power somewhere. Perhaps in Essos. He wants more, and I know what his target is. Hope more. The Green Man's eyes widened. He seeks that. Of course, Bloodraven laughed. He asked about what lies beneath it many times. He knows how much power it has. It created the Others, even when dying. It is alien beyond belief. It is ancient and not of this world and measures time differently from us. Thousands of years are nothing to it. It measures life in terms of millions of years. So dying is a long-term process for it, and even now it has power that Euron Greyjoy wants. The Green Man nodded. Where is he now? I don't know, and that's what should terrify you. As I said, his confrontation with Ned Stark before the gate in the Hightower is the first time that I have been able to see him in years, thanks to the old gods being there. He escaped from there, and well, he left his skin behind. Bloodraven's smile was something so thin that you could have shaved with it. His skin, Brienne almost stammered. He left his skin behind. What is he? The Green Man barked. What happened to him after he left you? Bloodraven rubbed a hand over his forehead. I know this much. He went to Valyria. Fuck, the Green Man muttered, the word quietly. How do you know? He went in, but nothing human came out. Whatever happened in there, he was different after. Different how? Not completely human anymore. Human mixed, I think, with something else. Something that gave him power and sharpened his hunger. Something that can evade even our eyes. How? The Blackfish asked keenly. How is that possible? The two older men sighed simultaneously, and then, after a short nod from the Green Man, Bloodraven leant back and raised his head, and the room dissolved into mist, and suddenly they were standing in bright sunshine on a warm hill. Jaime looked around in confusion. Where were they? The sun was hot, even though it was not particularly high in the sky, and he could see trees to the side that were not familiar to him. And then he frowned. There was a tension in the air, almost a throbbing that made him frown. To the south, he could see a line of great mountains that seemed to be emitting wisps of smoke and ash. What is that? The Blackfish rubbed at his forehead as if in pain for a moment. It's like a weight on my mind. Jaime stared at the man. Brienne was looking troubled as well. But the Green Man and Bloodraven were merely wincing just a tad. After a moment, he sniffed the air. It's like the air before a thunderstorm. The two old men looked at him oddly. You have it right. the Green Man said slowly. Interesting that you can sense it too. He looked at the line of mountains. These are the last moments that any Green Man can ever see of Valyria since the Doom. Until it broke, Bloodraven said in a heavy voice. The Valyrians thought that they could control it. They couldn't, and they paid the ultimate price for it. But this all feels so wrong, Brienne muttered. How could they not sense it? Because they thought that it was normal. When you've grown up with the sound of magic screaming as it bent, you think that that's what it should be like. That's its fine, usual, normal. Bloodraven sighed and shook his head. My ancestors thought that they were the superior beings on this world of ours. They had their dragons, their empire, their slaves, and their increasingly twisted form of magic. What could possibly go wrong? Far off in the distance to the south, something seemed to almost snap. He almost could sense it, with the Blackfish and Brienne turning swiftly and staring. For a moment, a bright light, almost as powerful as the sun, seemed to pulse. And then the clouds themselves seemed to flee as the mountains to the south shivered and shook, and then burst apart in fire and ash. Something was headed towards them, a white shiver in the air, moving almost too fast for him to see, and it blew rocks in the air as it passed over or through the mountains. He threw a hand up in terror. There was a wind on his face. They were all going to die, and then they were back in the throne room. There was a long moment of silence. Well now, the Blackfish said eventually. That was the moment of the doom, I take it. It was, Bloodraven said tiredly. Hundreds of thousands died in mere minutes, and millions more were condemned to die in the aftermath. The century of blood. And from that moment we cannot see Valyria. Not in green dreams at least, or like we are seeing now. People can physically go into Valyria, but at the risk of their lives. Magic is different there. Warped, changed, terrible, broken, almost. It's a hole in the world, Valyria. An abyss in places. We cannot see, and I do not think that we want to see it. If what I suspect is true, there are things in it that cannot survive outside it, or should ever be allowed to escape it. If you look into an abyss, sometimes something looks back. What kind of things? Jaime asked the question in a quavering voice. I don't know. The Dragon Lord Orion led 30,000 men into Valyria to claim it as his new empire. Not one was ever seen again. Not one survivor. Most people who seek Valyria never return. Don't forget that when Balerion the Black Dread brought Princess Aeria back, the biggest dragon that the Targaryens ever had was wounded. What could have wounded such a creature? And then there was the matter of Aeria's death. I've read the accounts of Grand Maester Bennifer and Septon Barth. I had nightmares for weeks after. There were things alive inside her. Hot things. The ice bath the men gave Aeria killed them, and for that we should be glad. What lives in Valyria now? What can live there? My uncle Jerian, Jaime started to say in horror, was lucky, Bloodraven barked out. He lost his eye and much of his crew and very nearly his life, but he was lucky. There was a long moment of tense silence. You think that there's something in Euron Greyjoy, then? Brienne asked carefully. Perhaps, Bloodraven muttered. Perhaps something. Perhaps someone. A melding, perhaps. There were reports of demons being in Valyria. What did Euron Greyjoy meet? What happened to him? We'll never know, unless he tells someone. So, him losing his skin in the High Tower does not matter. The Blackfish sounded horrified. Perhaps he does not need it anymore, the Green Man rumbled thoughtfully. Perhaps he can regrow it. The fact that he can evade our eyes? Aye, that worries me. He's dangerous. And powerful, Bloodraven warned. He cannot come back here. The wards are too strong. I have made sure of that. But he plots something new. I am sure of it. And he wants Hope Armor. The thing underneath it at least. The Blackfish had a set look on his face. The look of a man thinking deeply. He can never be allowed to have such power, can he? Never, Bloodraven said in a voice like stone. I have little time left, but you must stop him, especially given what I have sensed recently. I feel it in the earth, in the stones, in the water. What have you sensed? The Green Man looked as alarmed as he had ever seen him. Bloodraven's nostrils flared as if he was sniffing something. The others are trying to wake it up, one last thing, before it dies. And who knows what it can do. Break the wall, perhaps. Make something deadlier than the others. The second long night is coming. I will not see it begin, but you must see it end. Tyrion. They had made so many abortive attempts to go to Surestone that right up until the moment that they had trotted their horses out of the great gate of Winterfell and onto the road, along with their escort, he had been convinced that something would have happened to cause them to postpone it yet again, some crisis somewhere, some message from King's Landing or Castle Black or anywhere. But no, they were on the road again, the first time that he had been traveling since Ned Stark's great ride, of which he had been a small and bruised part of. There was little chance of such a fast and brutally hard ride. Not now, not with Daisy, with child. If he could have wrapped her up in a ball of the finest, softest linen he would have, despite her furious disapproval. No, as they rode south he had but one thing in his mind. Would their child cost him his wife? It was something that gnawed at his brain. His own mother had died after giving birth to him. Could it happen again? He did his best to hide it, but he knew that his wife knew that he was worried about it, even though he had quietly gone to Luwin and awkwardly expressed his concerns. The old maester had nodded slowly, and then pointed out that Daisy had also had a word with him, and that as she had childbearing hips, Luwin was not worried about her dying in childbirth. Although he did add the caveat that first births tended to be a little harder than second births. Tyrion didn't even want to think about that just yet. One birth was enough for him right now. They traveled quickly, but not too quickly. The guards that they had with them were a combination of House Lannister and House Stark, a combination that he had worked very hard at to make work. And as they traveled south, he found himself remembering that first ride north, that awkward ride with the then Daisy, Surestone, who had still been grieving for her father and who was still uncertain in how to treat the son of Tywin Lannister. He found himself looking at the crags that he had noticed before with an almost fond smile at times, before realizing that his wife was looking at him with a fond smile of her own, a tilt of the head, a nod of recognition at what she too was thinking. Gods, he loved her so much. When they reached the inn where they had first met, they both paused and blinked and looked at each other in surprise. The inn was larger than before, with an extended stable and a new extension. It also had a new name, Lion Fang and His Lady. There was even a sign hanging over the main entrance, with an excellent image of Daisy and a rather flattering one of himself on it. He looked at it, astonished, before dismounting and then walking with Daisy into the inn, where they were greeted with great deference and almost affection. "Lord Tyrion, be welcome to our humble establishment," the landlady said, and he recognized her as the wife of the merchant who had taken the place over, after the unlamented death of the piece of shit who had previously owned it. "I hope that you do not mind the new name of the inn. We remembered your previous visit, and we heard word of your exploits at the wall." Tyrion looked at her, glanced at Daisy, who seemed to be vastly amused by the entire thing, and then smiled broadly. "We don't mind at all. I don't think that I recall an inn ever being named after any other Lannister at all. In fact, I heartily approve of it." Gods, he wanted to laugh himself. And he did after they were shown to the best guest room in the inn. The place had indeed changed hugely since their last visit, and all for the better. They spent a very restful night there, with just the one bout of making love, and the next day they were off again, after leaving a small pouch of gold dragons with the inn owners, as a blessing for the future, and also an investment for the next time they visited. And then they were off along the road to the west, not as well maintained as the King's Road, but good enough for their party. It was rough country, hilly in places, with woods pressing to each side at times, but as they went on he could feel Daisy's spirits shift. "Home," she mouthed at times, with a look of both happiness and sadness, and he knew that she was thinking of the last time she had traveled the road, mourning her father, and with companions that would soon die. They stayed at another inn, a rougher one, and then at a small holdfast owned by a very minor house, before eventually they crested a rise and saw a rambling castle in front of them, a larger keep than he had thought, inside curtain walls that looked well maintained. "Surestone." "Keep," Daisy said in a rough, low voice that trembled more than a bit. "Home." "Home," Tyrion said with a smile, and then they were off, riding towards the open gates. The guards at the gates nodded respectfully as they rode in, and in the space before the main entrance to the keep there were others drawn up. Not many, but all in what Tyrion now knew to be the Surestone livery of a red tabard, with a book embroidered in black over a white double-headed axe. They were headed by a man dressed entirely in black and a maester who looked horribly young. As they dismounted, grooms ran to take their horses away, giving Daisy a moment to compose herself. And then he stepped up to her side, took her hand and approached the entourage at the entrance. "Maester Grantle," Daisy said solemnly. "Steward Morgan." My husband and I have returned. The two bowed. My lady and my lord, Morgan said. Surestone is yours. Welcome home. The maester's face twisted in misery. My lady, welcome home. May I present my apologies and my resignation. I let you and your father down, and for that I am heartily sorry. In fact, I failed you. I should have. Daisy raised a hand and cut him off. Maester Granel, had you ever seen anyone poisoned with tears forlorn before? The young maester pulled a face. Well, no, my lady, but nothing, mister. Boot murdered father, not you. My lady, I should have suspected something, I should have. Maester Grantel, enough. No more. Now, this is my husband, Lord Tyrion Lannister. I am with child. The long night is coming, and we have far more important things to think of. Gods, he adored her. Grantel gaped for a moment, looking stunned, whilst Morgan smiled smugly. Welcome home, my lady. All is well. Surestone is preparing for the long night, the steward said crisply. And the library is still intact. Daisy asked the question worriedly. It is, my lady, the master and the steward chorused, the latter passing her a lantern and some rush reeds. Daisy sighed with relief and then looked at Tyrion. Ready to see what father assembled? Delight kindled within him. They were seeing this at once. Oh, more than ready. Daisy took him by the hand and led him into the keep, a place that he noted was well designed and well protected, well maintained as well. The flagstones were smooth and the walls inside the keep plastered. They went up 2 sets of stairs and then along a corridor to a set of sturdy double doors. As they approached, Daisy pulled out a large and ornate key. I kept this well out of sight of that whores and boodle, she snapped, before inserting the key into the lock and twisting it. Luckily, he did not understand what was within, and then she pulled the doors open. Tyrion blinked as he looked inside. There were a lot of bookshelves inside. As Daisy walked in, she darted to one side to light candles and lanterns and sconces on the walls with the reeds from the lantern she was carrying. Gods, there were books in here. Books and books and books and manuscripts and papers and... Surely this was paradise. We have much to do, Tyrion muttered. And by all the gods, he was in heaven. Donifos pained me. He hated being on foot, so to speak. But a palanquin on the back of an elephant was slow and large and very visible. Yes, elephants could run, but the motion always made him seasick, and a running elephant in the streets of Volantis was a bad idea. So, when the word had come from that toothless idiot Malako, Magra, for an urgent and very, very secret meeting, he had been forced to use the tunnels that existed under the city, and now he was being carried by slaves on a litter through one of those tunnels. They were wide and tall and just the thing to use when transporting troops from one side of the Black Walls to the other in case of a siege. As he was carried along, escorted by 20 of his personal guards, he gnawed at a fingernail and speculated on just what in the name of the gods of Valyria could have sparked this call for such a secret meeting of the Triarchs of Volantis. If he had to guess, it was something to do with Daenerys Targaryen and her dragons. Had they been found? If so, who had found them? Had it been one of the many Volantis search parties, or one of the other free cities, in which case which one? As one of the 2 elephants on the Triarchy, he was committed to trade and not war. But he knew that war was coming. A war that Volantis would have to win. Valyria's first daughter had to have the only dragons that were on the board of the Game of Cities. Had to. It was only right that they did. Especially if Braavos was hunting for the girl and the dragons as well. If the Braavosi had the dragons, well, they would use them. Use them with great abandon, probably laughing at the irony. The litter slowed and he heard guards talking ahead. After a moment, he heard the sound of a large door being unlocked and the slaves carried the litter on again. He frowned a little, looked out of the side through the curtain, and then prepared himself. Sure enough, after a few minutes, the litter slowed again. Triarch, we are here. The words came from the captain of his guards, who looked as worried as a stone-faced veteran of many wars could ever look. Sir, I don't like this. He pushed the curtain to one side, swung himself out of the litter and looked at the door in front of him. I know. I'll send word when I am ready. And then he stepped forwards, pulled a key out of a pocket, unlocked the door and stepped through it. Locking the door behind him, there was a spiral staircase ahead of him, and he wearily plodded up it. Why here? Why this place? Yes, the meeting room was isolated and safe and secret. Was the news really that bad? What was going on? When he reached the top of the stairs, 100 steps. His legs were burning, he squinted at the passageway ahead of him. There was a solitary guard there at the end, by the closed door. He plodded along the passageway, making sure that his signet ring was very visible on the first finger of his right hand, and then waved it in front of the guard, who nodded and then opened the door. The man seemed to move rather stiffly, and he wondered why for a moment before dismissing the matter from his mind. Inside, he could see 3 large chairs, well padded and opulent, 2 of which were already occupied, and he straightened himself and then stalked forwards to sit in the free chair before resting his elbows on the arms of the chair and steepling his fingers in a reflective pose. "I have come in answer to your rather rude message, Triarch Magnir," he said haughtily. "Why are we here? What has happened?" He looked at the others, and then he paused. Malaka, Magir, and Inyassos, Visasor, were sitting stiff and upright in their own chairs, unmoving, except for their eyes, which were wide and terrified, flitting about the room almost wildly. What was wrong? Alarmed, he tried to turn his own head, but then something seemed to clamp down on his body, like an iron grip. He couldn't move a muscle, other than his own eyes, which looked around the limits of his vision as best he could. What was this? Magic? What was happening? "So good of you to join us, Triarch." The words came from behind him, and he realized that someone else was in the room with them. Who? After a moment, a figure walked into the center of the room. Before them all. The voice was deep enough to be a man, but he was so cloaked and hooded that nothing could be seen of him. "I have need of you all." The figure seemed to find his own words amusing for a long moment, given the almost gurgling giggling. "Yes," he said, eventually. "Need indeed." And then he pulled back his hood, and Donifus Panemion found himself wanting to piss himself in terror and then run. The man in front of him was a nightmare of skinless horror, black and red muscle moving over bone, eyes that stood out from their sockets, no eyelids, no hair, no lips, nothing but that terrible visage. Why was his flesh black in places? "I need a few things from you," the horrible thing said, before licking its own teeth with what looked like a dark purple tongue that seemed to be too large to be human. "Hair, skin, fat. I like to walk the streets of cities and not have people want to scream. For now, anyway, and now I have you. I also have the keys to Volantis. I can, briefly at least, command the city. A religious ceremony, perhaps, at the biggest temple within the black walls of Volantis, because you see, the guard outside and a few others, and what remains of you after I have taken what I need have a job to do. There's power to be harvested here." He stared at the horrible thing and desperately tried to break free, but he could not move a muscle other than his eyes. The skinless thing shed his robes and then flexed his fingers. "Shall we begin?" And then he knew nothing but pain and agony, like he could not stand before the darkness fell. "Robb, it was quiet in the Godswood. He didn't know where Quicksilver was exactly. But Grey Wolf seemed to be unworried and was sitting next to him as he prayed at the heart tree and then looked up at the face carved on the trunk. He was going to get married. The thought of it all made his head swim at times, and he wondered what had gone, though, Jon had, when he had married Yergret. Jon's letter from the Iron Islands had been detailed about many things, including his dark tale of Euron Greyjoy's many crimes and, well, monstrous behavior. What had he done to his own crew? His words about Yergret had been simple and to the point. He loved her. She loved him. They were wed. Simple. He wished that his own wedding could be as simple, that he could simply march into the Godswood with Vel, exchange their vows, and then vanish off into his bedchamber to ravage each other into exhaustion. However, he was the heir to Winterfell, and there had to be a ceremony of some significance. However, there was also the other end of the scale. They were about to be at war with their ancient enemy, the Others. He had briefly discussed it with the king that morning, in one of the now daily noon meetings to address matters. Robert Baratheon had looked gravely at him from one side of the chair in the night fort and said, "You don't need my fucking presence or your father's blessing or anything. We are at war, young Robb, a war that started thousands of years ago. You love her. She loves you. Nod to your ancestors. Tell your father's bannermen that it is what it is and bloody well do it. Wed her. Bed her, love her." The king's eyes had focused on something just out of sight. Don't wait. When it's before you, you grab onto it and don't ever let it go. Marry your vow, that's a command from your king, you hear? He and others had heard, so preparations were now well afoot. Winterfell was abuzz with all of the activity. There were already present members of the great houses of the north, Domeric Bolton, Ned Umber, and of course Mors Umber, who had told him several times to treat his granddaughter right, or else he'd have something to say to him, Ellis Karstark and others. Jorah Mormont and his new wife, the usse woman, were there as well, back from the small hold that father had granted them not too far away. Mother was visibly pregnant now, her stomach swelling, and he wondered if it would be a brother or a sister for him. He knew that she was praying for a son, and that she was also praying for a short war on the wall. He didn't know what to say about that. They didn't know how long the war would be. Couldn't even hope to guess. But they could not make assumptions. Word had come via Raven that Uncle Edmure was to wed Rosaline Frey, something that had made him raise both eyebrows. Some things were oddly similar between his past and the present, if he could say that. Mother had pondered if perhaps there could be a joint wedding at Moat Cailin to bind everyone together. No. Time was too short. He could sense it almost in the air. Summer was not ending, not yet, but he could feel something in the air, something intangible, something almost beyond the words that he had at his command. Mother and the others were sewing the cloak for Val at the ceremony that would take place tomorrow. He would be wed, and they would both be able to act on the fire that kindled in each other's eyes whenever they saw each other. He made a mental note to make sure that the bed in his room was, well, strong enough. He had a feeling that she would be fierce. Ned, the Roseyard was in excellent shape, as it had to be for the road that went from Old Town to Highgarden and, eventually, to King's Landing. They had ridden quite hard for several days up it, as he had noted the amount of trade passing up and down it, something that had prompted a quiet talk with Willis Tyrell. Ned, I will confess that were times when I wondered if my father was a blusterer, a blowhard, but he was always a good father to us all, and I knew that he could be something other than a blowhard. He died trying to save others, and in doing so warned me of a great threat, so great that I had to ask for your help. But there was something else. He always told me that a lord who neglected the roads of his realm was a fool. A good road swiftens trade, and men-at-arms if need be. It was a good point, and something that he more than agreed with. In the north, the roads were vital, especially in winter, and winter was coming, as they all knew. They rode north initially at some speed, but then slowed to spare the horses, staying at inns where they were welcomed with some reverence and where Frostfire was eyed with some caution. But not fear. Word had spread of her. Eventually they had finally reached the fork in the road, with the Roseyard heading up to Highgarden, but the road that he and his party meeting going east, not as good as the Roseyard, but still in better shape than many roads elsewhere. Willis had shaken his hand and embraced him, thanking him for saving the Reach and telling him that he would always be welcome there. All Starks, in fact, as the men around them had cheered him. It had been a strange moment, given that they had been enemies in the rebellion, but it was good to know that they could put such enmities aside for the common good. And now he and his men were riding east, towards the Dornish marches, and as they rode he wished that he was headed back home to Winterfell. There were a number of places that he wished he would never see again. The throne room of the Red Keep was one. The place where his father and brother had died such horrible, agonizing deaths, and where he had later confronted Robert after he had laughed over the bodies of Aelle Martell and her children. Yes, Robert had explained about that and apologized, but the memory was still a bitter one. Another place that he never wanted to ever see again was the courtyard of Starfall, where he had had to tell Ashera Dane that her brother was dead before handing over his bones and his sword. Something in her eyes had died that day, and he wondered sometimes what might have been in the rebellion had not happened. But that was foolishness. And then there was the place that they were riding to, the location of the Tower of Joy. He wanted to hawk and spit at the very thought of the name and the crimes that Rhaegar fucking Targaryen had committed there against his sister. And for what? Some of his best friends from the campaign had died there, fighting those honorless bastards. They rode on. The men were handpicked. All Northerners, all good fighters, and men who would keep their mouths shut. Not that there was much to keep secret here. They were going to retrieve the bones of the dead, and that was it. The northern bones would accompany them home. How he yearned for home now. Whilst Hightowers would go back to Old Town and went to Harrenhal. There was something else, though. Something that nagged at the back of his mind. He had killed a god with the aid of the old gods. The scar on his face was still there. Had it changed him in any way? He had no idea, but there did seem to be a change in him. He just could not put it into words. Whatever it was, Frostfire did not seem to share his unease. She just loped along next to his horse, occasionally vanishing off into the woods to one side to get some food. He looked ahead as they rode, and then he saw the first glimpse of red on the horizon, the Red Mountains. Dorne laid ahead, and by the old gods he didn't want to go there. But go there he must. He was a Stark, and he knew his duty. Tyrion, the way that the Fist of Winter had killed Bull had been terribly impressive, but regrettably quick, he thought blackly as he looked at the wonderful library of books and papers and even artifacts. Lord Torgon Surestone had been a man after his own heart. In terms of being a scholar of the most extraordinary talent, the Citadel would have hung a chain around his neck for this place, and then probably snaffled half of it for themselves. Surestone had been meticulous in his keeping of notes and also his maintenance of the books. The oldest of them had been lovingly maintained and preserved, with multiple copies made in case something happened to the original ones. But he was dead, murdered by Bootle, and Tyrion could never now meet him, which angered him beyond words. The man had not deserved to die like that, looking as if he had perished from a stroke. Bootle, the man had deserved a darker death, a slower one. He pulled his mind away from that. He was a better man than Bootle. He carefully pulled down another book from the pile next to him, looked at the title, and sighed. A history of the Red Kings, with certain notes on their abhorrent practices. I've heard of this. The Citadel only has one copy. Your father had, two copies. Gods, Daisy, what else is here? His wife did not reply, and he glanced at her. Daisy had frozen in place at the other side of the desk and was staring at a journal of some kind, in which Torgon Surestone's small but very neat script could be seen. Daisy, he knew, his wife said the words in a trembling voice. Knew what? That the second long night was coming. Father knew, or at the very least strongly suspected. Startled, he got down off his chair, hurried over, and then climbed onto a chair next to her. The page of the journal that she had opened it to had a number of small drawings in it, and he squinted at it. Then he paused. The crook. The star signs you mentioned. He looked at the other sketches and notations. Is that the Hearthstone and the Fist of Winter? His wife nodded, trembling, and he took her free hand and held it as she leant back, and the tears flowed. There's a note here to talk to Ned about what his father should have told him. He feared that Brandon had been told, but not Ned. He wrote about his regrets. Oh, Tyrion, he knew. He pulled her in for a one-armed hug as he looked at the journal. Damn Bootle, to whatever hell exists for such a man. And then he set his jaw, but now we are here to speak for him, and so we will. Let's keep searching, got knowledge here. We need to know what more your father could have told Ned. There was a long pause, and then she nodded and joined him in their search for knowledge. Exploring the cave system under the trees that sheltered them was one way to pass the time. It was hard to tell night from day in here, especially with the others too busy training to talk to him. The Green Man and Bloodraven were teaching the Blackfish and Brienne of Brienne Tully, all that they knew quite often in that dream world that could be accessed via the roots. He shivered a little every time he thought about what he had seen, thanks to those roots. The mockery and scorn in the eyes of Bloodraven, the judgment in those eyes. He knew that the former hand of the king and now near corpse on his weirwood throne doubted that Jaime could ever amount to much. Well, damn him! He'd show them all. The caves with the great and small skeletons were ones that he had only passed through once or twice. The feeling that the grinning white skulls were somehow watching him was not a pleasant one. It was strange to think that sentient beings would not want to be buried, but instead laid down to rot. But they were not men, they were... what? They had once had tongues and they could speak when they were alive, so that what did that make them? He did not like to think of the old wars between the children of the forest and giants and the first men. Based on what he knew now, how badly had those wars weakened them all before the arrival of the others. The others that dream he had had, on the way to the wall, still haunted him. It had been a dream of something from another time, from a future now closed to them, and that was something he was mightily glad of, but the implications of that, he was not a dreamer of green dreams like Uncle Jerian and young Alyerian. He was not a thinker like Tyrion. He was what? A former member of the Kingsguard who had killed one king for the right reasons and betrayed another so that he could stick his cock in his own sister. He was a wise fool or a foolish wise man, or something that he couldn't describe. A man of the Night's Watch now, defending humanity at the edge of the world from things out of darkest legend. Things that he once would have denied, laughed at the thought of them, mocked those who talked of them. And then there was the other thing that haunted him, the look on the face of young Brandon Stark as that other him from the time that had never happened, pushed him out of the window of the room that he and Cersei had been in. The wide, surprised, and then terrified eyes of the boy he was trying to kill. "You're the kind of man who'd push little boys out of windows," had been the words of Robb Stark, and for all his desperate efforts to persuade himself that he could never do such a thing, he had to admit that when he had been in the grip of his madness with Cersei, yes, he could have done that. He could have pushed 10 boys out of windows to hide his love for his sister. Lust, rather. Shame, perhaps. Madness of a certainty. What had she done to him? Well, here he was, beyond the wall, thanks to her. He had to put her out of his mind. She was gone, lost to him, to all of them now. An exile. The cave filled with mammoth bones fascinated him, and he wondered how many had been there once. And then there were the caves with the goats with pale eyes that watched him when he approached and bleated at him. Leaf was often in there, milking the goats, feeding them, and once leading one away to be killed and butchered. Leaf fascinated him at times. The one children of the forest left from what must have been so many more. He'd asked her where the others were now, the ones that she had mentioned, and she had smiled an odd, secretive little smile. The ways are open to us now, thanks to Rick and Stark. We have ways of using the trees. You might call it magic, we call it the ways. The others of my kind who were here, helping me to tend to and protect the Greenseer, they have passed south now to places that are protected again. We have a chance again. Before we were doomed, now we are not. And when the Greenseer passes, I will move on to join my kin in safety. And these caves will go dark and silent for a time. If we win, they will have light again. One day. He had nodded, unable to put into words what had heard in her voice. And the goats will go with me. Another secretive smile. You know nothing, Jaime Lannister. Perhaps I will teach you a little. He kept exploring. The search of the caves was the only thing that meant that he was not bored. He even crossed the natural bridge that crossed the underground river that rushed somewhere, deep and dark and cold. A place that quietly terrified him. He sat there on a rock for a while, staring into the darkness and then nodding slightly as he started to feel drowsy, until a clawed hand landed on his back and pulled him back from the abyss underneath his suddenly wide eyes. Do not do that again, Leaf scolded him. Not here. The river flows down to a sunless sea, where you would die quickly. I didn't mean to. He scrambled back from the rock he had been teetering on. My apologies. She looked at him, something strange about the expression on her face. You stand between two fates, she said eventually, and you must choose soon, life or death, hope or despair. You seem to either see things simply or complicate them. You are a strange man, Jaime Lannister. He looked away from her. I have done much in my life that was foolish. And what would you know about us men? She laughed for a moment. I know far more than you would ever care to know about us. You hunted us once, fought us, some loved us. Our blood runs through the veins of some of those who loved us. The plain ones, where winter once fell. Leaf made a complicated gesture with her hands on her face. They share our blood and I can feel it waking, shouting, living again. She shivered a little. Times change. People change. I had a human lover once, a man in a black cloak. A brother of yours. Our son went south, long ago, and I know that he is dead now, and I know now that one day I will have another child. She looked over her shoulder. We must return to the others. The Greenseer weakens. Come, now.